Welcome, one and all, to episode 46 of the NFL Draft Breakdown Podcast. I'm your host, Seth Cox. With me tonight, my co-host, Justin Higdon. Justin, after a week off, man, we've got some takes. We've got some football to talk. And it's been an interesting week without us talking about anything. But let's get right into it. How have you been, though?
Good. This is a jam-packed kind of show because we kind of passed over last week's games, which weren't a great slate of games, the week 2 games. But then week 3, we had a ton of good games. I think we're 3 games in. We can start to formulate opinions on some of these guys, and we're going to start with quarterbacks because it's always the hot topic. And it's been an up and down start, right?
It has. I mean, you and I both kind of jumped on with both feet the DeShone Kizer train. He's looked good, but now he's a 2-loss quarterback already, which is something you and I have talked about, that, those quarterback wins, as much as people like to scoff at the idea, it is something that goes into evaluations, and sometimes it does have some, truth to it. Not saying that like a Jared Goff isn't going to pan out, because he may, but I mean, we're talking about week 3 of the NFL season, or heading into week 3 of the NFL season, and like the Rams offense is one of the most anemic I've ever seen, and there's not even any chatter about Goff getting off the pine. So this week we saw a couple rebounds for guys that were highly touted coming into the year. Won by this podcast, Deshaun Watson. Now, this was against South Carolina State, right, for them?
Yeah, and he didn't even I think he only played like half the game. It was, this was his first really good statistical performance of the year when you take into account their first game against Auburn, where he started slowly and really picked up the pace down the stretch, made some clutch throws, including the clutch touchdown pass late in the game that put the nail in the coffin in that one. And then the next week against Troy, he's really struggled with the pressure, and there was a ton of pressure. Their line played really poorly in that game. And I mentioned before on a previous show that he dealt with some drops with receivers. So South Carolina State was kind of like a get-well opponent for him. It's an FCS opponent. Clemson won comfortably. They didn't even allow a point. They scored like 59 points. So to me, that's Clemson's offense, which has kind of looked crappy, getting healthy. But we still see some problems, some chinks in the armor, where like a Wayne Gallman, who is a touted running back, not by us, but by some people, he hasn't looked good. He hasn't been able to get it going. Some of the receivers have been hot and cold. I think Mike Williams, year off, he's still kind of rounding into form. We'll wait and see on that guy. But Watson put up the numbers. I didn't watch much of this game. I just kind of took a glance because I figured he was going to be able to handle this. And I thought that this is one of those games where you look at it and you say, if he struggles for any reason, then you really start to worry. But 12-15, 3 touchdowns. It was a breeze. He didn't have to play the whole game.
Mason Rudolph is a guy that you and I both liked coming into the year. He started out slow, and one of the things that we have expressed concern about with him on this show is that he doesn't take all the snaps. He was fighting with time with J.W. Walsh. Wasn't that the guy last year?
Yeah, Walsh was getting like red zone snaps because he's a better runner.
And so last week in their loss to, I can't even remember who they
Central
lost
Michigan. We're going to talk about that in a sec, yeah.
Yeah, Rudolph wasn't in some big key spots, and he took some deserved criticism. Something that you and I, are always going to talk about is, like, when a guy that we like is either plays a bad game or a red flag is raised, we're going to talk about it. And that was kind of concerning for me that he was getting kind of yo-yoed in that game a little bit. But then he comes out this week and wow. I mean, just just a different player. What do we expect from him going forward? Like, was that Pitt game the breakout that you and I have been waiting for, or was that just a game against a team that has given up some big games to worse teams already?
Yeah. So Rudolph goes out and he sets a school record for passing yards in a game, and he had over 400 yards passing. I think it was over 400 yards at halftime of that game. So he just really put together a great statistical performance. But I think what we're seeing here, and it's not that the guy isn't talented. We talked about him, and we talked about what he did as a 20-year-old last season. And somebody tweeted to me when I was talking about Rudolph going against Cooper Rush last week again, or 2 weeks ago against Central Michigan, that their feeling was that he looked like a player who was probably should return to school next year. And I would say that when I'm looking at him through the first few games of this season, when we talked about him in the summer and we talked about him now, we want to see a kind of a jump. We want to see him take that next step, and then is he going to be a guy who can declare early? And at this early stage, I probably would agree with that guy that tweeted at me and say that he does look like a player that should return for his senior season. And it's not to say that he's not a good prospect. And the thing is, we talked about this with Goff last year, with Paxton Lynch last year. We thought that those guys should return, and they didn't. And when you're going to be a first-round pick, I guess it doesn't really make sense financially for you to do so, especially if you're doing well academically, maybe even graduating early. Rudolph, skill-wise, he looks like a player who, if he does get drafted, and we see with Goff and with Paxton Lynch, both guys still sitting on the bench, getting their feet wet, getting their reps, getting their mental reps from their coaches while other guys start. So I think Rudolph, if he does come out early, he's kind of on that track. But I still like him. I still see good things there. It's just he doesn't quite look like he's taken that jump that I would have liked to see for a guy I would think of as an early entry.
Exactly, and that's something, like I said, you and I we try to be transparent through the process, and if we miss something, like if we're not, if we're not right on about something, or if we see something that is concerning, we want to talk about it. So,
should we talk about Brad Kaaya, because he kind of falls into the same category as Watson, where he started slow with a couple games and then he got healthy this past weekend.
Let's talk about Brad Kaaya. Again, you talked about it, kind of a little bit less of competition this week. Kaaya's issue this year, at least for me, is he's already thrown 3 interceptions, right? Mm-hmm. Like, last year he only threw 5. And I get that they're kind of loading him more on offense and stuff like that, expecting more of him. He's throwing the ball over 25 times per game. But he is working deeper. I mean, and the completion percentage is nice. So I wonder where those, I haven't sat down and watched every game of his, but where are those interceptions coming from? Why does he have 3 picks on the year? That's the first thing. And you might say, it's only 3 interceptions in 3 games. But, again, we're talking about a guy that threw 12 interceptions as a freshman and then reduced that to 5 as a sophomore. So, I mean, he's on pace again to be at, revert back to his freshman year. And that's the question is he making the jump that Justin talked about with Mason Rudolph?
Well, I think we can. To be fair to Brad Kaaya, I think we can attribute some of this to having a new coaching staff this year. So he's learning probably some new terminology and some different plays, and I think they're going to have him pass a lot more. I mean, 76 pass attempts through the first 3 games. I don't know really that doesn't put him on track really for more passing attempts than he had last season. But I think part of that is starting slow, like with these non-conference games. As they get into conference play, they might open things up more with him. He does have the 7 TDs, and he had 3 this past weekend. And the thing we should mention, like Appalachian State isn't South Carolina State. That is a team that when we had Justice on a couple weeks ago, he talked about they won the Sun Belt Conference, and they gave Tennessee all they could handle.
Yeah, just ask Tennessee about that.
Right, and Miami blew them out. So they won comfortably. Maybe Miami's kind of hitting their groove. This is a team that we've got to monitor because they have a new coaching staff. They might just be hitting their stride, and they might have some winnable games coming up that are going to really be good times to showcase Brad Kaaya. But the thing is, like, I just, Kaaya has some mechanical things. He's kind of a thin guy. Again, when you watch this player, you don't think of him as a player who is necessarily ready to declare early. And I don't want people to think this is a cop-out because we have talked about this in a number of starts. And I think it was Greg Gabriel said that he likes guys that are 3-year starters. Well, Kaaya basically fits that bill as a 3-year starter. So if he does have a successful year, he's got good arm and he's an athletic enough guy, but he hasn't really shown that command where you think first-round quarterback. But I think last weekend has to be taken as a positive. You looked at the first 2 weeks, slow start, even the second week really looking kind of bad. And then this week he comes through with a big game against a decent team. And he only threw 6 incompletions. He was 21 for 27. So really good game, over 300 yards, 3 touchdowns. He did have the 1 pick, but I think it's a positive sign for this guy.
The question now is, who is the sleeper pick for the draft? We've talked about this quite a bit coming into the year. You wrote about Brady Gustafson and the fact that he's just not the guy. But we saw another article, I can't remember who wrote it, the other day. You texted to me about Gustafson being the guy. So, but you had another guy kind of in mind. Maybe not a first-round guy, but a guy that's showing out really well, playing well, and a guy that has done it for several years now, and including in some really big games. I mean, and that's Cooper Rush of Central Michigan. 3-0. They beat Oklahoma State. He outplayed Mason Rudolph. I mean, I don't think there was any question about that. What do you think of Rush, the prospect, not just Rush, the college quarterback?
I don't know, man. I have to watch more of him. I watched him against Oklahoma State, and it was enough for me to want to go back and take a second look. And I have seen him before. He is going to be he's a 4-year starter, and he looks like he's taking another step this year. Now the one thing is he did pad his stats a little bit on that Hail Mary at the end of the Oklahoma State game that shouldn't have happened.
Yeah.
But he still made the play. He still made the throw that was complete. Terrible coverage by Oklahoma State to allow that catch and the lateral that ends up winning that game. But a failure by the officials had the stats. But even if you take that out, he still had a good game. I wrote about it at Draft Breakdown last week in my box score scouting article. And this past weekend, I did not see the game, but Cooper Rush had 6 passing touchdowns, again over 360 yards. So this is back-to-back weeks where he's producing. And, again, 4-year starter, decent MAC program. Guy has pretty good size. He's going to be about between 6'2 and 6'3", 220, 230. So he's a solid built guy. And he's a ginger. So gingers are all the rage in the NFL. We got Andy Dalton. We got Carson Wentz. Cooper Rush. If I was to just based on watching Oklahoma State, watching Central Michigan against Oklahoma State, and watching the same weekend watching Montana against Northern Iowa, okay? Cooper Rush looked like a much better NFL prospect than Brady Gustafson. the only thing Gustafson has on him is height and maybe a little bit of arm strength. But even the system that Gustafson plays in, it seems like it will take a lot more of a transition. It's not like he doesn't play in the same type of offense as a Carson Wentz did. Rush, I'm not ready. I'm not going to jump in and say where Rush should be drafted because I really don't know. I just haven't watched enough of the guy, but he definitely merits a look. And I know that Jeff Risdon really likes him, and we've had him on, and I know he's seen Cooper Rush in person.
How much do you want to talk about Brady Gustafson?
I think I think he is an undrafted free agent, FCS quarterback. He's a tall guy with a good arm who is a spot thrower, and he really needs a lot of work in that regard. He's not a very athletic guy. He even jokes about it. It was Emily Kaplan for mmqb.com who wrote about him last week. It was Brent Sobleski for Bleacher Report that wrote about him over the summer, talking about, is he the next Wentz? And I don't think either one of them said that he was, but just to
asking the question.
Yeah, just to ask the question, my answer is no. And I wrote about it at revengeofthebirds.com both last week in my Rough Draft weekly draft article, and I wrote about it over the summer when I wrote about potential sleeper quarterbacks, Mitch Leidner and Gustafson, neither of whom I think are actual sleeper quarterbacks. Yeah.
Oh, wait. I mean, yeah, sleeper, not
right.
Good. Sorry. Didn't mean to say that. Stock up, stock down. Let's start with stock down because these are some names. Dalvin Cook, maybe just Florida State, but Dalvin Cook specifically. I mean, we don't ever want to read too much into one game, and that's what we got in this Louisville blowout. And I mean, it was a blowout. But there's some questions coming about Cook and whether he is the guy that everybody thought he was. And here's something that Justin kind of turned me on to this line of thinking. And I get that Francois, is that his name? Francois, yeah. Francois is a freshman and everything. But Cook is averaging 4.6 yards per carry. It's one of those things that you want to see him as a quote-unquote game changer, dominant running back. You want to see more from him, right?
Yeah. Even more concerning is that he's averaging 3.7 yards per carry in the game against Ole Miss and the game against Louisville. So this weekend, 3.4, Ole Miss 4.0. But he did have the 100 receiving yards against Ole Miss. So my concern is not with Dalvin Cook's talent. He makes some very remarkable runs. He's got speed. He's got good feet. I think he's got decent size. We're not going to talk about the off-field thing because he was cleared for that. So let's just talk about on the field, and let's talk about his injury or his injuries, plural, because I think that is affecting him. He's had multiple shoulder surgeries, as we've talked about in our ACC preview, and I think that is making him a little bit cautious, a little bit tentative. I don't see necessarily the hard charging style in between the tackles that I would like to see. And I think I talked about how I think that's going to be a concern for NFL player personnel people, because when you're talking about between the tackles running, shoulders are important. It could be a problem. And if they determine that these multiple shoulder injuries, I think he's got 3 now, 3 surgeries on both shoulders combined. That is a serious concern, and it's going to have to be looked at carefully. And right now, I don't see the same guy that I saw last year that was averaging well over 7 yards a carry, almost 7.5 yards a carry. This is a slow start. It's a slow start for Florida State in general, but we did see what Cook can do in an open field. I don't doubt that the guy is a gifted player. And when we talk about stock down, I mean, what do we mean? We're not talking about undraftable here. We're talking
No.
about
But we're talking about a guy that's a day two now type player. But also, there's questions, like you said, about what the injury report is going to
yeah,
reveal with him and whether or not he's a guy that can, no pun intended, shoulder the load. And that shoulder
those
is,
shoulders, both of them.
yeah, those shoulders are an issue right now. I mean, let's just be
At
honest.
least a concern. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think you're seeing it, like you said, in against FBS or whatever it's called now, opponents.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, he's under 3 yards a carry.
Under 4, yeah.
Or that's what I meant, under 4 yards per carry. Sorry.
Yeah.
And that's just, I mean,
that's Jalen Hurt territory.
I thought we were going to be nice this week.
We're not talking about him this week. Just kidding.
Baker Mayfield.
Yeah, Baker Mayfield had problems against a legitimate defense. I mean, that was, to me, that was the easiest call of the week. And yeah, it's let's talk about both of those quarterbacks, because JT Barrett's stock isn't down, but what you look at when you look at Baker Mayfield and we look at JT Barrett, I think it's important to know the difference between really good college quarterbacks and then versus really good NFL prospect quarterbacks. And I personally think that as we've said many times, I think JT Barrett will be back next year. I actually think Baker Mayfield will be back next year too, now that he's gotten that year of eligibility straightened out. And I just don't think there were people who seemed super high on him last year, comparing him to Johnny Manziel, and take all of Johnny Manziel's off the field issues out of the equation. And just Baker Mayfield is just not that type of dynamic player. And Ohio State gave him problems. And to Mayfield's credit, he showed a lot of leadership after the game. He was upset about what went down, and he said it shouldn't have happened. But this is where we've talked about recruiting, and this is a player who had very few college scholarship offers at the FBS level. I think only a couple, and he ends up foregoing those to walk on at Texas Tech. He gets beat out there. He transfers to Oklahoma, which seemed like the perfect fit last year. But I literally had no doubt in my mind that Ohio State was going to go into Norman last weekend and beat them by two to three touchdowns. And that's exactly what happened. They won by 3 touchdowns. I didn't think Mayfield was the type of quarterback that could give Ohio State problems. He wasn't mobile enough to beat them. Like we've seen them struggle with mobile quarterbacks in the past. And he just didn't have the arm talent to beat them. What has become a crazy ball hawking secondary that now has I believe they have like 9 interceptions now through 3 games. So it just was a terrible matchup for Oklahoma. And Ohio State's defense shut down Mayfield, and they shut down that running game, except for a couple of plays by Joe Mixon.
So, and for people that like Baker Mayfield, and you and I like him as a college quarterback, we've talked about this a lot.
I think he's a fun college quarterback. Yeah, I think Oklahoma can be successful with him. And Big 12 is a different ball game than playing Ohio State.
My question would be this, and maybe this isn't fair, and maybe it is, but go through his wins, all of his wins. I don't care if it's at Texas Tech or while at Oklahoma. What is Baker Mayfield's signature win, and how did he perform in it? So that would be kind of my question to like the Mayfield supporters. Again, Justin, I think he's a wonderful college quarterback, but that's kind of where it ends for Mayfield. So Juju Smith-Schuster, we talked about wide receivers to kind of start the year, and he was the guy. And now, I don't know if it's a quarterback thing or if it's a USC thing, but, I mean, he has not been the guy that he was billed to be, which is, the most dynamic receiver in college football. I would even venture to ask the question: is he hurt? Because he's gone 1 catch and 3 catches against good opponents. He had 7 for 56 yards and 2 touchdowns against Utah State. But against Alabama and Stanford combined, he's got 4 catches for 43 yards.
Right. The Alabama game, you can see where they defended him they just kind of bracketed him off in zone coverage, and they weren't able to get the ball to him. I think that is part of the problem is the quarterback play and maybe his coaching staff. I still don't understand why USC couldn't hire a bigger marquee name at head coach. It seems like a program that should be doing so much better in their coaching hires, and they have not hit on those. And Smith-Schuster, I hadn't really considered until you just said it that they could be hurt. I have not heard anything to that effect. But when you're talking about
neither have I. But we're talking about a guy that's got 4 catches in 2 games that matter.
Yeah, and he had almost 1,500 yards last year and averaged over 16 yards a catch. And what's really interesting, I only saw the Alabama game. I did not see the last 2 games that USC played. I saw a little bit of Stanford, just with the Christian McCaffrey highlights, kind of. But with Smith-Schuster, there were no highlights. There was 3 catches, and nobody made a video of that. And the one place that did make a video was Bleacher Report on Friday morning, and it was either Thursday or Friday morning. Matt Miller tweeted out and said that he's heard from NFL scouts that Juju Smith-Schuster is the most overrated player in the draft. And I had to do a double take there. I don't really know what to think about that. I haven't seen enough of him this year, and I don't really rate players preseason because
it's useless.
Right. So if you want to rate players preseason, it's just a recipe for just having your terrible takes retweeted to you
thrown at
later
you by us.
But I thought that really struck me. Are NFL scouts really saying he's the most overrated player? I have no reason to really doubt that report, but and then he goes out and gets 3 catches for 34 yards against Stanford after that video comes out, and I'm sure that whoever said that is probably patting himself on the back.
How much do we want to talk about Patrick Towles? Stock down for a guy like Towles that was undraftable coming into the season, or like a late round flyer. Easy enough for me to say, but he hasn't been good with the transfer.
Right. I think that's why we want to talk about Towles, right? He was at Kentucky, where last summer of 2015, before that season started, there was some buzz about Patrick Towles and that he could be a player on the rise, and they didn't play well last year. So he gets replaced. He transfers to Boston College, maybe fresh start. It's not happening for this guy. He had an abysmal game. They got shut out last week. Was it Georgia Tech? Oh, Virginia Tech, right? They got shut out, and he was a complete disaster. So it's not happening for this guy, and I don't really think – I want to tell people the stats because it's just striking. 9 for 28. 9 for 28. Didn't even complete 1/3 of his passes for 80 yards and a pick. I think Patrick Towles is over.
Going to the good side, our buddy Ian Wharton tweeted out an interesting take about Jabril Peppers.
Okay.
And I think Ian, and we'll save his take for the hot takes, but I think Ian's one of the few people that has this take on Peppers. But man, he's looked.
Let's go ahead and throw a take in right now.
All right, I want to make sure I get it right. So, do you have it there?
I'll talk about Peppers first, and
Okay,
then
go ahead.
we'll go back to this take because so I watched Peppers against Colorado, and let me tell you guys this: I'm sold. I'm sold on this guy. I think he's just a great football player. When I saw him coming into the year, and he was getting a new role this year, which is basically playing linebacker, or if you want to call it in the box safety, variation between that, some kind of hybrid role. But I was asking for him to have more production, and so far so good. He's got 9.5 tackles for loss, 3 sacks. The guy is just a baller, playmaker, just returning kicks, returning punts. He had a punt return touchdown late in the game against Colorado. You can see when he has the ball in his hand how great his vision is as a runner, and then he doesn't go down easily. When you look at him on defense playing linebacker, to me he's a much better linebacker than what people were telling me about Myles Jack last year, and I've texted that to Seth and other people. When I look at the way he plays linebacker, he's so disciplined, and he makes the play. He finishes the play. Not only does he force the cut, as PFF might say, Jabril Peppers actually makes the tackle. He makes the tackle for loss, and right now he's leading the nation in tackles for loss. He had a phenomenal game against Colorado. I think he has 7.5 tackles for loss the last 2 weeks. We're waiting for Michigan to really get into the meat of their schedule. They play Penn State this weekend. I'm not really sure if that counts as the meat of the schedule yet, but we'll get there. And I think, I was as everyone who's listening to this show, I was such a holdout of Myles Jack. I do have questions of, like, if a team drafts Jabril Peppers, what they're going to do with him, because I think that is important. And I don't think he's like a deep center field safety. I know he's not a boundary cornerback, but the guy can flat out run. He makes plays with the ball in his hand. He's going to be an excellent return man if they let him do that. And I love the way he plays by the line of scrimmage, and excellent blitzer. I'm sold on this guy as a high-end prospect. To me, he's on my list of go-to guys.
Now, it's only 2 games in the season, so we're not going to, say too much. But how's Myles Jack playing?
Is he playing?
Oh, yeah, that's right. So
I think the last time I checked, they were trying to find a role for him. So
how's
it's got to be hard. It's got to be hard for him to crack that lineup.
The faster Ray Lewis. I'll never forget that. Faster Ray Lewis.
Yeah, somehow you can't. They can't find a role for him in Jacksonville.
Our buddy Ian Morton. We disagree with this take as a safety. I think I'm fine with him not playing cornerback in the NFL on Jabril Peppers. Doesn't have the speed to play boundary cornerback or safety in the NFL. Nickel cornerback or linebacker. Jeff Risdon said he's gotten bigger and faster. It happens. He thinks he's a safety in the NFL. Ian responded, not sure I see him as more than a box safety. Lacking a true position to this point doesn't help. And then Jeff hit the T shot with anything you wanted Myles Jack to do, Peppers does it better and faster. So
I agree with you. Yeah,
that was the hot take on that. And he was correct. So, I mean, we'll see what happens. So, but
now I agree with Ian talking about
corner.
As far as like role playing corner, but I don't agree with him about the speed. All due respect, I think that Peppers is going to be a legit 4.4 guy. He'll run between a 4.4 and 4.5, I predict. We never saw Jack run, did we? Or what was he? Did he run but not do the agility?
He ran like a 4.2 in everybody's mind, but he
right. So, I mean, the comparison between those two guys isn't quite fair. Maybe I don't know. I don't really want to compare Peppers to anybody, but the reason I even brought Jack up is because Peppers is playing linebacker and he's making linebacker plays. So he is going to be really undersized if that's what they want to do with him at the pro level. But it's not that I don't think he can cover. I think he can absolutely cover the slot and get guys out in the flat, cover tight ends and things like that. So I'm not too concerned about him being able to. I think whoever drafts him is going to find a role for him, and I just think he's going to be a first-round pick. It would be surprising to me if he somehow falls flat on his face once Big Ten play starts.
Noah Brown, another Big Ten guy, Ohio State guy, kind of put himself on the map this week with his 4-touchdown performance, including maybe the catch of the year. You know, when you talk about a stock up for a guy like this, are we talking about a guy that's now a draftable prospect as opposed to an undraftable?
I think with Noah Brown, what we're talking about is a player who's a redshirt sophomore who missed all of last year with a broken leg. So what we did not know what we were getting with Noah Brown. All we knew was that Ohio State players were really broken up when he was injured in fall practice a year ago. And we know that they've talked about how great his hands are and how big of a red zone threat that he is. And this game, he just owned the red zone. He owned the jump balls, and he caught 4 touchdown passes on his first 4 catches. He ended up with 5 catches on the game. And he has 5 touchdowns now on the year. JT Barrett was putting the ball up for Noah Brown, and Noah Brown was making the play no matter where the ball was. And that includes reaching around the Oklahoma cornerback, bear hugging him, and catching the ball around the guy's back, securing it for a touchdown. And he got both feet down. I love when a college receiver gets 2 feet down inbounds on those types of plays, whether it's at the boundary, on the sidelines, or in the end zone, because that is an NFL catch, and that's something that you can look at and it translates. I love when guys make great catches with 1 foot in, but the thing is that's going to be an incompletion. Noah Brown reaching, bear hugging a guy while making a catch off the guy's back, getting 2 feet down. Phenomenal play. So it's not that we didn't. I don't think we had enough information to say if Noah Brown was draftable or not, but now we can say, as a redshirt sophomore, draft eligible, he's putting himself on the map as a player who could be a possible early entry. It's a fast start to the season, and that's one of their big opponents this year, and he came up huge in a primetime game.
Donald Pumphrey is a guy we talked about in the preseason, and I don't know what to do with him as an NFL prospect, but I know I want him on my team. He's one of those guys. Like I want him on my team. So far this year, I think he has just under 600 yards rushing through 3 games. He's averaging 8.2 yards per carry and has 7 touchdowns. A guy that's 5'9" and 180. Is he a slot receiver in the NFL? Is he a gadget? Like, he's a guy that you get the ball in his hands, but like, what is he? Because the NFL won't let him be a running back. We've already know. I shouldn't say that. The NFL won't let him be a feature back. We already know that.
Yeah, I agree with that. Somebody on my timeline today on Twitter, he compared Donnell Pumphrey to Amir Abdullah. And when you look at the feet and the moves, the quickness, you kind of see that. Abdullah was a thicker guy. He was a heavier guy, and he weighed in over 200 pounds when all was said and done. And Pumphrey's not going to approach that. But Pumphrey is a speed burner, and he's going to run faster than what we saw out of Amir Abdullah. Abdullah ran around a 4.6, and he tested great in everything else, but he was a 4.6 guy with tons of quickness. Pumphrey is a guy with tons of quickness and 4.3, 4.4 speed. So he's very similar in, I think, athleticism to what we saw at Tyler Ervin last year at San Jose State. But I think Pumphrey is a better running back, a better overall player than what we saw to Irvin. And that's not a knock on Irvin. I think Tyler Irvin was the 4th or 5th running back drafted this year. And he went to the Houston Texans. But I think Pumphrey is just a more dependable, more reliable guy. He's a little bit bigger. He's got equal speed. He's a good receiver. And he's just a very, very good football player. I really liked him last year. I thought he could have been an early entry prospect, and he decided to come back. He is the San Diego State all-time rushing record holder, so he's broken Marshall Faulk's record, and he has 501 yards rushing in the last 2 games. That's phenomenal. I really like Pumphrey, and I'm excited to see what kind of numbers he puts up. He's on pace for over 2,000 yards, and we know that's probably going to slow down, but he is a player who's already had 1,600-yard and 1,800-yard seasons up to this point, and now he's up to, like you said, almost 600 through 3 games.
James Washington's a player we highlighted before the season started, and he's Mason Rudolph's go-to guy so far. With Washington, I think outside of Pumphrey, this is the one that we kind of saw coming. In terms of ability, he's a very good player. He's had over 1,000 yards receiving as a sophomore. He's kind of the new build of receiver at 6 feet, 205 pounds. But through 3 games, he's just under 400 yards and 3 touchdowns, averaging 21 yards per catch. What is he as a prospect, and how do you determine how far up this guy's stock can go? Yeah,
James Washington. The reason we put him on this list is what he did this past weekend, where we talked about Rudolph throwing for 540 yards, and James Washington had 296 of those yards. He doesn't have the great size. As you mentioned, he has good size. He is 6 foot and 200 pounds or so would put him in the range of like a Chris Moore from Cincinnati last year, who was a player that I liked. And Washington is not projected to run super, super fast. He's like
he's not projected to be in the 4.4s, 4.3s, which
right.
You expect. But he's a guy like this isn't a comparison. And so don't nobody jump on me for this. I don't see this as the player comparison, but he's a guy that like DeAndre Hopkins, where like nothing makes sense, but he's always successful. Like Hopkins ran like a 4.51 or something like that.
Yeah, he was over 4. He was over 4.5, but he, like you said, he's always open. He always makes the play. And what's so impressive about Washington, I was gonna bring up Leonte Carroo. Because Carroo was also a player who didn't have great speed and size per se, but he was a player who just constantly made big plays for Rutgers and averaged like 20 yards a catch and scored a ton of touchdowns. And that's Washington. Washington over 20 yards a catch last year on 53 catches, 10 touchdowns. This year, over 20 yards a catch already this year in three games and 3 touchdowns. So the majority of those yards came last weekend, and the week before that against Central Michigan, I would have liked to have seen more out of him. That was the one game that I caught out of this team. But you can't sneeze at 296 yards receiving, where he caught 9 passes and averaged over 32 yards a catch. So we have to put Washington on here. He's a junior, and we know that like running backs, receivers tend to declare early. So we've got to watch this guy now. He has announced his arrival. If we didn't already know about him, and I know that the fantasy guys, fantasy football Twitter has been all over this guy for like 2 years. Now draftniks have to take note and consider that he's probably going to go into the draft.
Games this week, there's some good ones, and then there's some not good ones, but we'll hit on the good ones. Wisconsin at Michigan State. when you look at Michigan State and what they did to Notre Dame, now Notre Dame made a nice little comeback to make it look a little more respectable. But outside of Malik McDowell, or is it McDowell? I can't remember now. There's not a bunch of round one talent on that Michigan State roster. How are they winning? And do we give enough credit to Mark D'Antonio?
He's one of the top college coaches in football. You know, he routinely gets 3-star guys and gets the best out of them. He turns them into NFL prospects. If you are a middle of the road high school recruit, you should be looking at Michigan State and trying to catch on there. Look what Jack Conklin did as a walk-on, a guy who was invited to a camp and ends up going 8th overall in the draft. We've seen others. Trey Waynes was a 3-star recruit because he had a knee injury in high school, and he ends up going 11th overall. So D'Antonio is sending guys to the NFL, and so Malik McDowell is a player who's probably a top 10 type of prospect. I know that Justice loves him and thinks he's phenomenal. Then you look at players like Riley Bulla, who is playing. He played very well last weekend, and then they have a few good defensive backs that played very well. And then why I really want to highlight this game is because McDowell gets to go up against this Wisconsin program that always has a solid offensive line, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's always a good test for defensive linemen. Wisconsin's been churning out offensive line for over a decade, and it's just a good test for him. We get to see if this guy can make some plays and really if he can open things up for his teammates. I don't think Wisconsin's a great team this year, but they do have I think Corey Clement, the running back, is going to be back this year. He sat out last week with an injury in a game they probably thought they were going to win more handily. They kind of squeaked it out. But it's Big Ten season now, so these teams will be just playing smash mouth and beating themselves up and trying to get, into in Wisconsin's case, they have a chance to try and get into the one half of the Big Ten championship game to face what's probably going to be Ohio State, Michigan, or maybe Michigan State if they can really keep this up. I don't expect them to.
Yeah, they need to fix those divisions.
Yeah, it's so bizarre. They have really, no question, the two best programs, and now Michigan State was right there until all their stars graduated, and they're kind of left with this team we don't know a ton about, but still have a great coach and sturdy lineup, and that's all on one side of the bracket. And then you've got Iowa, who lost to North Dakota State last week.
Hey, Carson Wentz, baby, 2-0, 2-0.
Well, Iowa lost to Easton Wick, so and you got Wisconsin, Iowa battling now on the other side, really.
And then we have another nice little test for Myles Garrett and against Arkansas and Dan Skipper. And we've talked about Skipper on this show a bit. His place in the NFL is as a field goal and extra point blocker, which he does extremely well as TCU. Yeah. And so, but Garrett is off to now I don't know what site you use, but I'm using the Sports Reference college football site, and they have him at 3 sacks already on the season, which I mean it's not bad. It's actually very good, but the hype behind this guy is just so unreal. And it's not as though he's gone against, world beaters so far, but he's gotten one in every game this season. No, he didn't have any
2 last weekend.
Yeah, he didn't have any against Prairie View A&M. And let's be honest, Auburn's offensive line is not the best we've seen.
I bet Garrett barely played against Prairie View A&M. I mean,
Yeah.
to be fair.
Yeah, but I mean, 3 sacks in really 2.5 games, we'll call it. And he gets another interesting test. I don't know if I would call it a good test in Dan Skipper. He beat up on the big guy from UCLA. I can't remember his name off the top of my head. Connor Murphy or something. I don't remember, something like that.
McDermott. Yeah. Garrett beat up on McDermott, who's another tall lineman like Skipper. But I want to say Skipper, I don't want to just put this guy in a category where he's a special teamer only, because when I watched Skipper 2 years ago, he was a waist bender. He looked clumsy. He wasn't really doing it for me. And then I watched him 2 weeks ago against TCU. They were playing. He was up against TCU edge rusher Josh Caraway. And Caraway is a really thin guy. He's like 6'4", 240, very thin for an edge rusher. But Dan Skipper handled him most of the game. He gave up 1 sack where Caraway beat him straight to the outside, just beat him with speed. But otherwise, Dan Skipper was holding his own. He was definitely looking good in run blocking. And he looked like the type of player that can play line in the NFL. But this is a huge, huge test. This is more important for Skipper than it is for Garrett. If Skipper can put together the type of game where he holds Garrett, if he can hold Garrett to a couple pressures and just kind of keep his quarterback clean, then maybe Skipper can elevate his stock. I don't think a lot of people have any doubts about Myles Garrett's stock. I mean, he's got 3 sacks this year. It's not like he's having a Jadeveon Clowney type of draft entry year where Clowney had only 4.5 the whole year. Garrett's already up there. It's just that he's not leading the FBS, so we don't think he's, we could kind of, throw a little shade, but he's still right there. And the 2 sacks last weekend, I mean, just look at this guy, the steps that he takes and the power that he has and the speed. And I love that he's an actual big guy at the edge. He's an actual big 260-pound guy.
We have Florida at Tennessee. How much more time do we give these Tennessee prospects?
Man,
because they're 3-0. So I mean,
yeah, they're winning, but they had kind of a nail biter for a while against Ohio U, and that was with OU on the road at Tennessee. Yeah, I'm just not. People have listened. They know I'm not a big Jalen Hurd guy. He's got 4.2 yards a carry, despite the fact that they've had a game against OU and Appalachian State. It's just not there for that guy. I just don't see it. And Josh Dobbs, I don't really know what to do with him. I don't think he's an NFL quarterback. So the unfortunate thing is Cameron Sutton, who's a player I really liked on Tennessee's defensive backfield. He's got a broken bone in his ankle. He's going to miss some time.
And a guy that I like in this, and you mentioned Sutton, and that's really unfortunate that he got hurt. But let's be honest. I mean, Florida's quarterback situation is still everybody made fun of Tim Tebow, but they haven't really been able to fill that role since then. I really like Jalen Reeves-Maybin, but I have no idea what he can do in the NFL. But did you see the vine of him? I think it was last week when they played Vodtech, sitting down on one of those. The tech, I think it was Ford. He sat down on a Ford route pretty well. He's a nice player, but he's 6 feet and only 230.
Mm-hmm.
Like what is he? I mean, is he a off ball, like weak side linebacker only type player in the NFL?
I guess the worry with a player like that is always going to be: is he Arthur Brown? Is he never going to see the field because he's too
Miles Jack? Oh wait.
Yeah,
2 weeks. I'm just kidding. I'm kidding.
Reeves-Maybin looks like a good player. I think Barnett looks like a good player on their defense. both those guys have questions of where are they going to line up as pro prospects. So that's one of the reasons why we put Tennessee on here this week, and why we continue to put Tennessee down. You know, you're not going to watch Tennessee OU, but when you look at the box score, you kind of are taken aback by the fact that he didn't blow that team out at home. Now they have Florida, and it's again at Tennessee, right? So you've got Florida coach, or a Florida program that seems to be on the up with a coach and Jim McElwain, and they've got Jack Del Rio's son now playing quarterback. And then Florida has some interesting prospects too. Among them is the cornerback Jalen Tabor. So how much does Tabor get tested by a guy like Josh Dobbs, who's not really known for his throwing ability? So those are the interesting things that we have in this game, and we're going to typically spotlight a big SEC showdown like this.
Even if it is just Tennessee, Florida now. I mean, that's still a great game. Huge game. Huge game. Stanford at UCLA kind of has lost its luster a little bit. And that's only because UCLA lost that first game. What do we make of this game? And I mean, they barely squeaked by a average, and maybe that's too kind, BYU team. I mean, Rosen has raised a lot of antennas with his just comments and who he is as a person, and that's not a shot at him, the player, but and he's not even. I mean, he's not even draft eligible yet. What I and then you have Stanford on the other side, where they're one of the hardest teams just to scout, quote unquote, because it's kind of like Alabama, just not as talented, but it's kind of like Alabama, where they're just a well-oiled machine. I mean, they lose first round guards and Josh Garnett. Now they have another first round guard. The kid's name's escaping me right now. That's getting talked up. I mean, what do you make of this matchup overall?
What I'm looking at here is Christian McCaffrey, as usual. I mean, you can't take your eyes off this guy. He's just such a dynamic player, and he does everything. But we just don't see a lot of white running backs that are this talented. And so people are going to – I'm fascinated with what people want to do with this guy. Do they want to make him a slot receiver? Do they want to make him – are they going to say that he can't run between the tackles? And I think he's a running back. I think it's evident. He's so successful, and he's a very good all-around player. So if you want to say that he can't shoulder the load or whatever, I don't know that I agree with that. But even if you say that, then – there's so much else he could do throughout the course of a game in returns and receiving that you have to consider him a potential first-round pick, I think, unless he just completely flops in athletic testing, which does not seem to be the case. His brother from Duke, who wasn't even a draftable prospect, ran a 4.4 last year. So McCaffrey, I want to see him playing against this UCLA defense where they have some draftable guys on the defensive front. We talked about Eddie Vanderdoes, and there's the player, I can't remember his last name, Takarist. He's a edge rusher. They got Deion Hollins, and they got some players in that defensive backfield. So that's the real matchup I'm looking at, is Stanford's O-line versus UCLA's defense, and then Christian McCaffrey. As an aside, to look at Rosen, who hasn't been the world beater that we thought he might be looking at his freshman year. But with Rosen, it's already kind of silly what things are being said about him. We talked about the take a couple weeks ago where it said, maybe he needs to worry more about football and not his opinions about things off the field or whatever. He's very outspoken about the NCAA and about how players are treated and things like that. I kind of just blow that off at this point. I'm not going to put too much stock into that. Young guys have opinions about things, and maybe he hasn't. Maybe his opinions are well formed, or maybe he'll become a more vocal guy down the road. I don't necessarily take that as a negative if things are getting done, if he's putting in the work. I mean, guys have a platform, and they talk about things. We talked about his coach, Jim Mora Jr., being critical of him, and that's probably more of a concern than anything. But as far as Josh Rosen having an opinion on how NCAA players are treated or how things are going in political environments, or wearing a Trump hat or an F Trump hat or something like that, I mean, come on. I don't think that necessarily has any bearing. Didn't Tom Brady have a "Make America Great Again" hat? I mean, give me a break with this stuff.
Yeah, and look where that got him. I mean, really.
Right.
But and then the kid I was forgetting was Johnny Casper, so I want to make sure I mention him because, I mean, the Stanford offensive line. That's what I'm saying. Like, how many college programs produce first round guards in 10 years, let alone in 5 drafts, like 3 potential first round guards in 5 drafts. That's ridiculous. So
I mean, they're cranking out first round guards like Andrus Peat and
yeah, we're not even talking about Andrus yet. Hey, Andrus gets moved to guard and he's successful. You're talking about 4 guards going in the first round, 4 players that play guard going in the first round in 5 consecutive drafts. That's pretty incredible. It's hard enough to get 4 players drafted in the first round. 4 guards, that's incredible.
Last game, they're cranking out offensive linemen.
Last game, Penn State at Michigan. And you kind of talked about this earlier. Penn State's got a couple interesting prospects, but this is really about what does Michigan have now that they're playing a semi-real team? Because I won't even give Penn State a real team yet, but a team that has some talent.
Does Michigan have any road games this year? I think this is their 4th straight home game, and they played all the powerhouse. I'm sorry, they played all the powerhouses like Hawaii and they played Colorado, and they went down early. But no, to be serious, like the reason I like this game is because I'm a believer in Penn State receiver Chris Godwin, who started kind of slow the first couple of weeks, and then last weekend had over 100 yards and a touchdown on 7 catches. So I like the challenge of Chris Godwin against Michigan's defensive backfield, where they have some talent, and Michigan's got a defensive front that's going to create pressure on a not so great Penn State quarterback. And then for the deep fantasy dynasty players who, Saquon Barkley is not draft eligible yet, but he's always fun to watch. And
it'll be a nice test for that defense and Jabril Peppers and, what he can do against a dynamic runner like Barkley, who is, the quote-unquote great running back in college.
Yeah, it's a great test for Peppers. And also, you almost have to watch every Michigan game just so you can see the announcers just trying to figure out how many times they can say Jake Butt and some kind of variation, some kind of play on words with Jake Butt's name. And last week he had 7 catches and a touchdown too. So, and one of the best tight ends in the country.
He is, and he'll be a guy that gets picked up on day 2 in this draft, and that's he's a very, very good player, and he's going to be one of those guys that just kind of sticks around for a really long time.
And Michigan's got the 2 speedy receivers, Jay Chesson and Amaro Darbo, and neither one of them has really got going yet. So it'll be interesting to see. We know Chesson caught fire at the end of last season, and then he was coming off an injury, so that could be part of the slow start. But those are two players to watch as we go forward too.
Hot takes time, and Justin and I are going to begin to kind of alienate ourselves and our fan base. So just so you guys are aware, it's that time of year again. And again, we'll own up to our terrible takes like we always do.
Maybe even tonight.
But we also like to make fun of the people that will beat their take into the ground despite it being wrong through only two NFL games. So let's
lots of preseason action now.
Right. But let's put that disclaimer out there. It's only 2 games, but y'all got to take an L on Will Fuller. Like, you guys ripped the Texans. You were so upset. How do you take Will Fuller before Josh Doctson? Josh Doctson is incredible at being on the PUP list and not playing in the NFL games. You guys.
Well, they threw like 4 straight fade routes to him. It's just that Cousins overthrew him every time.
Yeah. So, well, again, that comes from the fact that he hasn't developed any chemistry either because he's been completely unable to practice or play. So, but here's the thing, right? And this is what Justin and I, like to make fun of people about. It's okay to have a take. Takes are great. Takes make this part of the show fun, but takes also get clicks, hate clicks, whatever. Clicks are clicks are clicks. I run a website for SB Nation. I know about clicks, trust me. Like I understand the need to bring in clicks. But when you create a narrative as a writer, whatever you want to call yourself, a talent evaluator, whatever, when you create a narrative and then that narrative proves to be wrong, don't continue to go back to the narrative and overlook everything else that a player is doing. In this case, it's our good buddy Cien Fehe, who does some stuff for Bleacher Report that you guys don't read and get mad at every week with his quarterback rankings.
It's pronounced Kian. We'll pronounce it right.
Well, I don't know. I'm blocked. I don't even know. But so he tweeted out, Will Fuller dropped a perfect deep ball from Brock. Fuller living up to expectations. Brock exceeding his. Hey, Cian or Kian or whatever. You said he sucked. He's only gone for 9 catches for 211 yards and 1 touchdown in his first 2 games. The first receiver in NFL history drafted in the first round to open up with back-to-back 100-yard games. Oh, but he dropped the ball, so he can't be a receiver because he dropped a pass. That makes him bad. Our buddy Matt Harmon has talked about this before. Drops are a way to give yourself a crutch on a guy if you're not sure. We talked about, Kelvin Benjamin, but look how good Kelvin Benjamin is this year. And so
I'm hearing that he's still bad at football. When I read tweets, I'm still hearing that. I'm seeing it, I guess.
Well, that's because you follow.
I follow way too many people. But piggybacking off your take that you just read, this is what's going to happen with Will Fuller throughout his entire career, at least the early part of his career, right? The vultures are circling, waiting for him to have 1 drop so that they can tweet how he had 1 drop, and he dropped, I don't know, 10% of his targets at Notre Dame, but he had more than that. He had touchdowns on like 15% of his targets. And here we have 1 drop. We've got 1 touchdown. He's got 9 catches. A couple of them are pretty crazy good catches. And then when he makes a catch where maybe he bobbled the ball, right? Oh, he double caught it. That's why you can't buy Will Fuller right now. Well, here's why you can buy Will Fuller. Because he is outrunning everybody. And he's wide open deep at least twice a game. And Brock Osweiler is targeting him at a higher rate. At least in the first week, he targeted him 11 times. That was more than he targeted DeAndre Hopkins. And they were downfield throws. And he's making a good amount of those plays when the throws are on target. Again, only the one drop. He had 4 for 107 this week, no touchdowns, but he had a 53-yard catch that, God forbid, he double caught. Well, he still caught it. And it's still counted.
He's only on pace for 1,600 yards, so I mean he's gotta pick it up.
I mean, we're not gonna, I'm not gonna try and take some kind of victory lap on this because there's time to be played. But what happens? I mean, there is a young quarterback who was signed to a big free agent deal, and he has a receiver that he trusts enough to throw 18 or 19 targets in the first 2 weeks. And Fuller has made some tough plays and some nice catches along the sidelines. There was one this week where he caught it, but he was led too far out of bounds. And that wasn't on him. That was on the quarterback. So this is a player, we talked about why Will Fuller was a good prospect. And to be fair, what did we say? We said he was probably a second-round guy. We said he's probably a day 2 guy, right? But not surprising that he goes earlier than that, especially in what we talked about on our draft recap show. Perfect pick because he's a perfect complement to a guy like DeAndre Hopkins. And that is really playing out right now. Whether you think Osweiler is good or not, those two receivers are complementing each other very well. And Houston's 2-0, right?
Yeah, and they're a good team. Like you and I talked about this a little bit, not on the air, but I mean, just Jadeveon Clowney's kind of finally getting into gear. J.J. Watt's not even healthy yet, and so.
And then they got Benardrick McKinney starting to make plays. They've got some defensive backs playing well, and they've got this offense where they have one guy who's a super clutch possession receiver and one guy who is going to break the top off your defense
every chance.
And then they've got and then they've got a running back that they have a lot of faith in too. The Texans are a team that I think they're gonna be players in that AFC South, and we see so far they look like the best team in that division.
You got any hot takes tonight?
Well, I have one more on Will Fuller, and this one's from our buddy Ben Albright. He said, Will Fuller, not my top 10 receivers. Tape showed one-trick pony. You'll likely have to scheme open. Give me a creator like Josh Doctson. To Ben's point, I thought Josh Doctson was a really good creator. He was. We talked about that when he did his improv with Trevon Boykin, how Boykin would scramble and Doctson was really good breaking off his routes and getting open and finding open space. I'm not sure now looking back how well that translates when you have a guy like Jay Gruden who wants a certain structure in the offense. And, of course, Doctson had the injury. Now, that being said, I thought Doctson was really a good prospect. I still do. I don't think that the book's not closed on this draft, right? But
no, and exactly.
Will Fuller not in the top 10 that's the hot take. That's the hot take.
Exactly.
I mean, because he's got to be. If you're honest with yourself about speed being a dynamic trait and being a rare trait, and a guy who put up such good production at a high level of competition, the touchdowns. There's another take I won't even read, but it's saying he's just to paraphrase, bigger reach than Philip Dorsett. No, he's not. He's not a bigger reach than Philip Dorsett because Will Fuller produced in college. Philip Dorsett didn't. He was a punt returner, and he had like half the production. So that's a terrible take. I'll actually read that. That was from, if Will Fuller is the first receiver to be drafted, then he'd be a bigger reach than Philip Dorsett. Well, he qualified that well. That's at FF Dynasty 101. That's a bad take. He's not similar to Philip Dorsett. Dorsett was a reach, especially where he got picked by a team that already had T.Y. Hilton. So I hate that comparison. I hate the term one-trick pony too. So the phrase one-trick pony too. So that gets me worked up too. But I'm here to read the hottest take of the week. If Vegas is correct, this is from at ESPN. if Vegas is correct, the Browns are headed for an 0-16 season. To which our buddy Chad Dinkins at DinkDunkDish retweeted, "I'm here for you at AFC to NFC." And I replied, "If the Browns go 0-16 and Wentz is a baller, I'll probably hang it up." Seth, man, I know you're moving here at the end of the year. But as things look right now, we're probably on track for me retiring at the end of this year.
Yeah, I'll talk you out of retirement. It gets better, I promise. I mean, I was a Cardinals fan. I still am, but I've been a Cardinals fan for a long time, and you have the Cavs at least and everything like that. So, I only have the Cardinals and the heartbreak that is the Arizona Cardinals.
If I'm here giving crap to everybody you talked about Will Fuller and made these bad takes about Will Fuller, I have to take ownership of what so far looks to be pretty bad takes about Carson Wentz, right? I mean, he's 2-0. He's the best rookie starter, at least as far as what we've seen. I mean, Dak Prescott, I guess you could make the argument for, but Goff, who is a player that I didn't particularly like that much either, but he's not starting. He's not playing. Connor Cook was a guy I liked better. He's not playing. He's third string. And Cardale Jones is third string. So my quarterback takes, quite honestly, they're not looking good. And but I'm not ready to just take a loss on this. But I will say, I will give credit where credit is due. I think that Philadelphia fans have every right to be excited about this. Their team's 2-0, and their coaching staff has really figured out a way to make things easier on Wentz and get him acclimated to the pro game, which I did not think was going to be possible after he missed all that time with injury. So there is something to be said about Wentz's intelligence and Wentz's he's got the athleticism, the arm strength. We knew that. We knew he could make some good throws. I still think it's a little early to crown this guy, but I don't want it to sound like sour grapes. So I want to give credit to Carson Wentz, and I want to give a nod to Philly fans and say you have a right to be excited. I hate that it's at the expense of people making fun of the Browns for making a trade. I still think that's going to turn out to be a good move for the Browns because look at the Browns. They're on their third quarterback in 3 weeks.
Cody Kessler era, baby.
Yeah. Oh, my God. And you know that I hate that. Everybody knows that I hate that.
Yeah, you're going to take a giant L when Kessler leads you guys to 6 wins, and you guys he goes 6-8 on the season.
Oh my God! If he goes 6-8 and then they don't draft a quarterback, it's going to be tough. Then you will not be able to talk me out of retirement, not at all. But that's not going to happen. But I think Cleveland fans need to be patient with this thing. Carson Wentz wasn't going to be good in Cleveland this year. They don't have the setup that Philly has, and I think Philly's done a really good job. And I think we'll have to wait and see if indeed Wentz is as good as he seems. I think there are some flags out there that say we need to temper our enthusiasm, but I think Philly fans have a right to be excited.
Yeah, and it's just fun. I mean, it's fun to see these guys come in and play well, and because it's so hard to find quarterbacks in the NFL. So if even if you have to take an L on something, it's fun to see these guys come in and play well, and perhaps be the future quarterbacks that the NFL needs. So this game can continue to. I mean, it's always going to be great, but so we can see some enjoyable football. I mean, because we even saw like Jameis Winston came in here against the Arizona Cardinals, and it was ugly. I mean, it was 4 interceptions, ugly. So
exactly, Winston had a great game week 1, week 2, very bad. That doesn't mean that Jameis Winston's a bad player, and it doesn't mean that I wish he was on my team as far as quarterback play. Yeah, it's very interesting. Quarterback play more than anything else. We have these roller coaster week to week takes, and in the case of Wentz, there's no reason to go down on the roller coaster, because even if I thought that he wasn't a first round pick, what I was saying was he was a fourth round pick, and that doesn't seem to be the case. Same with Dak Prescott, by the way. So I'm gonna need to self reflect and take a look and see why I didn't really hit the nail on the head with those guys. And it could be something as simple as coaching and scheme, or it could be it could be something that catches up with them later, or I could have just been flat out wrong, and I'm willing to accept that if that's the case.
And we'll get to that in the summer, like Justin said. While
in like 2 years.
Yeah, I'm in Chicago and we're having a good time. So, well, thanks as always for listening. We'll be back next week with another new show and another bundle of hot takes to go over. So check us out on iTunes and SoundCloud. And thanks for listening, everybody.